If anyone here loves me, she has my sincere thanks. Nay, if anyone here is so good as to love me, why, I'll be a brother to her. She shall have my sincere, warm, unsullied affection. When I was coming up in the car with the very kind young lady who was delegated to show me the way, she asked me what I was going to talk about, and I said I wasn't sure. I said I had some illustrations, and I was going to bring them in. I said I was certain to give those illustrations, but that I hadn't the faintest notion what they were going to illustrate. Now, I've been thinking it over in this forest glade, and I've decided to work them in with something about morals and the caprices of memory. That seems to me to be a pretty good subject. You see, everybody has a memory, and it's pretty sure to have caprices. And, of course, everybody has morals. It's my opinion that everyone I know has morals, though I wouldn't like to ask. I know I have, but I'd rather teach them than practice them any day. Give them to others, that's my motto. Then you never have any use for them when you're left without. Now, speaking of the caprices of memory in general, and of mine in particular, it's strange to think of all the tricks this little mental process plays on us. Here we're endowed with a faculty of mind that ought to be more supremely serviceable to us than them all. And what happens? This memory of ours stores up a perfect record of the most useless facts and anecdotes and experiences. And all the things that we ought to know, that we need to know, that we'd profit by knowing, it casts aside with the careless indifference of a girl refusing her true lover. It's terrible to think of this phenomenon. I tremble in all my members when I consider all the really valuable things that I've forgotten in 70 years, when I meditate upon the caprices of memory. There's a bird out in California that is one perfect symbol of the human memory. I've forgotten the bird's name, just because it would be valuable for me to know it, to recall it to your own minds, perhaps. But this fool of a creature goes around collecting the most ridiculous things you can imagine and storing them up. He never selects a thing that could ever prove of the slightest help to him. But he goes about gathering iron forks and spoons and tin cans and broken mousetraps, all sorts of rubbish that is difficult for him to carry and yet be any use when he gets it. Why, that bird will go buy a gold watch to bring back one of those patent cake pans. Now, my mind is just like that, and my mind isn't very different from yours, and so our minds are just like that bird. We pass by what would be of inestimable value to us and pack our memories with the most trivial odds and ends that never by any chance under any circumstances whatsoever could be of the slightest use to anyone. Now, things that I have remembered are constantly popping into my head, and I am repeatedly startled by the vividness with which they recur to me after the lapse of years and their utter uselessness in being remembered at all. I was thinking over some on my way up here. They were illustrations I spoke about to the young lady on the way up. And I've come to the conclusion, curious though it is, that I can use every one of these freaks of memory to teach you all a lesson. I'm convinced that each one has its moral, and I think it's my duty to hand the moral on to you. Now, I recall that when I was a boy, I was a good boy. I was a very good boy. Why, I was the best boy in my school. I was the best boy in that little Missouri town where I lived. The population was only about 20 million. You may not believe it, but I was the best boy in that state. And in the United States, for that matter. But I don't know why I never heard anyone say that but myself. I always recognized it. But even those nearest and dearest to me couldn't seem to see it. My mother, especially, seemed to think there was something wrong with that estimate, and she never got over that prejudice. Now, when my mother got to be 85 years old, her memory failed her. She forgot little threads that hold life's patches of meaning together. She was living out west then, and I went on to visit her. I hadn't seen my mother in a year or so. And when I got there, she knew my face, knew I was married, knew I had a family and that I was living with them. But she couldn't, for the life of her, tell my name or who I was. So I told her I was her boy. "But you don't live with me," she said. "No," said I, "I'm living in Hartford." "What are you doing there?" "Going to school." "Large school?" "Very large." "All boys?" "All boys." "And how do you stand?" said my mother. "I'm the best boy in that school," I answered. "Well," said my mother, with a return of her old fire, "I'd like to know what the other boys are like." Now, one point in this story is the fact that my mother's mind went back to my school days and remembered my little youthful self-prejudice when she'd forgotten everything else about me. The other point is the moral. There's one there that you will find if you search for it. Now, here's something else I remember. It's about the first time I ever stole a watermelon. Stole is a strong word. Stole? Stole? No, I don't mean that. It was the first time I ever withdrew a watermelon, retired it from circulation. The first time I ever extracted a watermelon. That is exactly the word I want, extracted. It is definite. It is precise. It perfectly conveys my idea. Its use in dentistry connotes the delicate shade of meaning I am looking for. You know we never extract our own teeth. And it was not my watermelon that I extracted. I extracted that watermelon from a farmer's wagon while he was inside negotiating with another customer. I carried that watermelon to one of the secluded recesses of the lumberyard, and there I broke it open. It was a green watermelon. Well, do you know, when I saw that, I began to feel sorry. Sorry. It seemed to me that I had done wrong. I reflected deeply. I reflected that I was young. I think I was just 11. But I knew that, though immature, I did not lack moral advancement. I knew what a boy ought to do who had extracted a watermelon like that. I considered George Washington and what action he would have taken under similar circumstances. Then I knew there was just one thing to make me feel right inside, and that was restitution. So I said to myself, I will do that. I will take that green watermelon back where I got it from. And the minute I had said it, I felt that great moral uplift that comes to you when you've made a noble resolution. So I gathered up the biggest fragments, and I carried them back to the farmer's wagon, and I restored the watermelon, what was left of it. And I made him give me a good one in place of it, too. And I told him he ought to be ashamed of himself going around working off his worthless old green watermelons on trusting purchasers who had to rely on him. How could they tell from the outside whether the melons were good or not? That was his business. And if he didn't reform, I told him I'd see that he didn't get any more of my trade, nor anybody else's I knew, if I could help it. You know, that man was as contrite as a revivalist's last convert. He said he was all broken up to think I'd gotten a green watermelon. He promised me he would never carry another green watermelon if he starved for it. And he drove off, a better man. Now, do you see what I did for that man? He was on a downward path, and I rescued him. But all I got out of it was a watermelon. Yet I'd rather have that memory, just that memory of the good I did for that depraved farmer, than all the material gain you can think of. Look at the lesson he got. I never got anything like that from it, but I ought to be satisfied. I was only 11 years old, but I secured everlasting benefit to other people. The moral in this is perfectly clear, and I think there's one in the next memory I'm going to tell you about.